Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. A wee bit later than intended, but that's the internet gremlins for you, so apologies for the wait. My guest this evening is Maureen Watts, retired MSP for Aberdeen South and Kincardine, and a regular guest and supporter of Broadcasting Scotland. So it's a packed show for you today. I'll just run through the headlines before coming to Maureen. The Ukraine Security Service said on Monday it had detained an informer accused of helping Russia plot an attack on Volodymyr Zelensky as he visited a flood-hit region. The first group of people due to be housed on the Bibby Stockholm barge in Portland, Dorset, have been taken on board. The SNP has called on the Labour Party candidate in Rutherglen and Hamilton West to come clean on whether his party would keep the UK government's benefit cap, including the hated rape clause. In an interview with Financial Times, Thomas Buberl, the chief executive of AXA, said that the growing crisis facing the NHS in England presents quite a few business opportunities for AXA to expand its private healthcare business. Business confidence fell last month amid jitters over the slowing UK economy, dampening company plans to hire more staff, according to a survey of more than 4,000 firms. GB News is being investigated for 4 further potential breaches of impartiality rules as a media regulator Ofcom struggles with the right-wing channel's willingness to push the boundaries of UK broadcasting rules. The Culture, Media and Sport Committee has called on the UK government to tackle tech abuse as they warn devices, including smart home security systems, were being used to coerce and control victims of domestic abuse. A leading Democratic senator has called on President Biden to get more personally engaged in stopping racists in the Israeli government from a land grab in the occupied territories and committing gross violations of Palestinian rights or risk damage to the US's credibility. And with Results Day tomorrow, more than 144,000 pupils across Scotland will be able to access a range of advice in the coming days, including a dedicated helpline to assist them with their exam results. So to get back to our first story, the Ukraine update, day 530 of Russia's war in Ukraine. Ukraine's security service said on Monday it had detained an informer accused of helping Russia plot an attack on President Volodymyr Zelensky as he visited a flood-hit region. The SBU security service said the detained woman was gathering intelligence to try and find out Zelensky's itinerary before his visit to the southern Mykolaiv region. It published a blurred image of the woman being detained by masked officers in a kitchen, as well as some phone messages and handwritten notes about military activity. Russia has claimed its troops have advanced 3 kilometers along the Kupiansk front in northeast Ukraine over the past 3 days. The city of Kupiansk and surrounding areas of Ukraine's Kharkiv region were liberated by Ukraine forces last September. Andrei Yermak, head of the Office of Ukrainian Presidency, announced that 22 more Ukrainian soldiers had been returned from Russian captivity, stating that all of them are soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine. Yermak also reported that the Russians shelled the village of Kucherivka in Kupian district, hitting a house. 2 dead and 300 people are known. The deaths were in addition to a person killed and several injured during a difficult night of Russian shelling of Kherson, the city's governor, Alexander Prokudin, has said. Serhiy Lizak, governor of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, said Ukrainian forces shot down a Russian drone over his region today. China's foreign ministry said on Monday that recent international talks in Saudi Arabia on resolving the Ukraine crisis helped consolidate international consensus. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of President Zelensky, said there can be no compromise on the president's peace formula for Ukraine, including any immediate ceasefires which would give Russia time to stay in the occupied territories. Ukrainian MP Yehor Chernev said today that the key parliamentary factions in Germany had reached a consensus to supply Ukraine with Taurus cruise missiles, but an official decision was yet to come. Poland's border guard has asked the defence ministry to send another 1,000 troops to the border with Belarus. The Chonhar bridge to the occupied Crimean peninsula was damaged by a missile strike on Sunday, the Moscow-installed governor said. Another of the three road links between Russia and Crimea, the Russian-occupied parts of mainland Ukraine near the town of Henichesk, was shelled. Russia has said its forces struck military air bases in the Khmelnytsky and Rivne regions in western Ukraine. The deputy governor of the Khmelnytsky region, Serhiy Tyurin, said a military airfield in Starokostyaniv was among the targets. Well, Maureen, the first story we come to for discussion is the issue of the asylum seekers being moved on board the Bibi Stockholm barge. The first group of people due to be housed on the Bibi Stockholm barge in Portland, Dorset, have been taken on board. Coaches were seen arriving at Portland this morning as people gathered at the entrance with welcome signs. About 50 people were expected to be loaded onto the barge today. Their arrival comes amid confusion over the UK government's immigration policies at the start of Rishi Sunak's Small Boats Week, in which the government plans a series of so-called eye-catching announcements. A Home Office minister indicated that up to 500 people could be on board by the end of the week, but Number 10 appeared to suggest that the minister had misspoken. The same minister indicated that the Home Office was examining proposals to send asylum seekers to a UK territory in the South Atlantic. However, Whitehall sources said the proposal was not being pursued. Amnesty International UK condemned the use of the barge to house asylum seekers. Steve Valdez-Simmons, the charity's Refugee and Migrant Rights Director, said, "It seems there's nothing this government won't do to make people seeking asylum feel unwelcome and unsafe in this country." Reminiscent of the prison hulks from the Victorian era, the Bibi Stockholm is an utterly shameful way to house people who have fled terror, conflict and persecution. At the weekend, Labour declined to comment to moving asylum seekers off barges, saying they would have to assess the situation once they were in government. The SNP's Justice and Immigration spokesperson, Stuart Donald MP, accused Labour of being indistinguishable from the Tories. The SNP's accusation follows on from Sir Keir Starmer saying that an incoming Labour government would retain the two-child benefit cap, rate clause and bedroom tax. Commenting, Stuart MacDonald MP said, "Labour has, once again, demonstrated how indistinguishable they are from the Tories by supporting their abhorrent asylum policy. Instead of treating those fleeing war-torn countries or places where they face persecution as criminals, the Tories and pro-Brexit Labour should be treating these individuals as victims, which is exactly what they are." This stance from both the Tories and pro-Brexit Labour underlines that independence is the only way Scotland can build a fair and humane asylum system. Well, I was reading today that there have been suggestions that that the Conservative government is planning on basing the Bibi Stockholm off Glasgow. Have you heard anything more about this, Maureen?
No, I haven't heard that. Having got it towed to Dorset, I don't know why they would then want to relocate it up to Glasgow, and it certainly couldn't be relocated, I wouldn't have thought, for safety concerns with people on board. So I think they should have thought about what its ultimate destination should be before they started putting people on board, because I think even among the asylum seekers that were supposed to board today, about 35 of them, not the 50 as suggested in the media, 20 refused to go on. So there's clearly still great safety concerns about the vessel. And, it was previously used apparently offshore to house offshore workers, but they would have been in single cabins. And the government is intending to put bunk beds in the cabins. So I think it's going to be grossly overcrowded. And, I just think it's totally and utterly unacceptable that this is happening. We don't know if these poor people who are going to be housed on there are going to be given preference in terms of their claims being processed or not. So I really think it's a totally and utterly unsatisfactory situation.
And in terms of the messaging that the hostile environment, so the continued scapegoating of people who have legitimate right to claim asylum in this country, um, it's but so bizarre that there's this return to this, literally Dickensian era form, sort of way of housing so-called undesirables, as a UK government would have us see them. And we're told that it's not a prison, and yet they're not allowed to leave, and they're going to be given exercise in a yard which has no view; they can only see the sky. There's going to be overcrowding, and presumably not only personal safety but sort of personal dignity issues in terms of overcrowding. And I believe the fire service has raised concerns as well about the potential for damage and danger. And on top of all of that, just a sort of additional cruelty, the televisions are going to be scrambled so that you can't get a signal on them, and so even the most basic ways of alleviating boredom um, will be removed from people. I mean, is the cruelty the point with this Tory government and presumably Labour?
Well, I think there's an awful lot of confusion about what's going to happen and what security there is. I mean, I heard on one bulletin today that people will be free to go around the town, and there'll be buses from the port to the town. And I'm thinking, well, if that's the case, then surely they could, you know, flee from the boat. So I think there's it's as with everything here, whether it's flying people to Rwanda or putting them in their boats, they're actually just the UK government is grasping at straws on this to try and fulfill one of its pledges to stop the boats. And I think the whole idea is to make everything as uncomfortable as possible, whether it's in hotels where you can't get the right food, whether it's on these boats, whether it's in flying to Rwanda or on army bases where we know the housing is pretty poor there too. The government really haven't got a clue. They haven't got the people with the right experience processing the claims, so that's why there's a huge backlog. And yes, I mean, Labour perhaps were honest in saying they're going to have to keep what's in place now in place until they get a real grip on processing the claims, and that's not going to happen anytime soon if Labour get elected and once they see what the real situation is. So it's complete and utter mess, a disgrace to the UK government.
I mean, is it a bit unfair for people to be criticising the Labour government for being honest in that stance? Because if they inherit a position, it's something that they would be unable to sort overnight, presumably. I mean, unless they were to start working on a plan now, which some might say would be the humane thing to do.
Yes, I mean, at least the Labour Party have been honest, saying that they will have to keep it initially to see how they can sort out the mess that the Tory government will hopefully have left. The Labour Party will inherit, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Although I guess it's kind of, we have to be careful what we wish for, because there's an element of frying pan and fire here. So, I mean, moving on to the SNP calling on the Labour Party candidate in Rutherglen and Hamilton West to come clean on whether his party would keep the UK government's benefit cap, as new analysis shows a damaging impact on hundreds of families in the constituency. S&P analysis, using UK Government Department for Work and Pensions data, shows around 1,300 families in South Lanarkshire have seen their income slashed as a result of the benefit cap, which reduces the total amount of financial support families can get. In a move reminiscent of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown vowing to stick to the Tory spending plans ahead of the 1997 general election, the Labour Party has said it would not abolish the Tory bedroom tax and two-child cap, despite them having pushed more than 20,000 Scottish children into poverty and costing the Scottish Government hundreds of millions of pounds as those policies are mitigated. Uh, Overall, the benefit cap has left the poorest families in Scotland more than £70 million worse off since 2013. 28,188 households in Scotland have seen their housing benefit or universal credit payments reduced as a result of the benefit cap, including 24,546 households with children. The analysis shows that on average, high impacted families in Scotland lose £50 a month as a result of the benefit cap. SNP candidate for Rutherglen and Hamilton West, Councillor Katie Loudon, says Hundreds of the poorest families in Rutherglen and Hamilton West have seen their income slashed as a result of the Tory benefit cap. Michael Shanks must come clean over whether the pro-Brexit Labour Party is secretly planning to keep this cruel Westminster policy against Scotland's will. Whether it's back in the two-child cap, bedroom tax or benefits cap, the pro-Brexit Labour Party has become a carbon copy of the Tories. Do you think that criticism is deserved, Maureen?
I do think it's fair criticism, and it's interesting that this has become one of the major planks of the by-election so early on. But it clearly shows um, splits in the Labour Party between the UK Labour Party and the branch office, which is the Labour Party in Scotland. There are a number of Labour MSPs who have come out against the bedroom tax. And I would have thought that if Keir Starmer was going to try and put some clear blue water or red water, whatever you want, between him and his party and the Tories in what is a run up to the general election, that this might have been one of the policies that they would have had a definite stance on and been clear that this heinous policy was not going to be continued and make contingencies in the budget for that. But clearly, it is not a top priority for the Labour Party. And so I think they will feel the backlash from being so indecisive on this, or decisive in that they're going to keep it and keep Tory policies, that I feel that will be to their detriment at the ballot box.
Well, I mean, the Labour Party's pledge to continue using the private sector in England in terms of NHS. I mean, this next story we're looking at, in an interview with the Financial Times, Thomas Burbell, the chief executive of AXA, said the growing crisis facing the NHS in England presents quite a few business opportunities for AXA to expand its private healthcare business. The AXA boss highlighted the mounting pressures on the health service, including record waiting lists, rising inflation putting up costs such as the price of drugs, and a crisis with recruiting and retaining staff. With what is happening at the moment, probably the first choice of a doctor that is newly qualified would not be the NHS, Burbell added. Burbell said AXA was responding by investing in the UK market, increasing the size of its telemedicine business, where it provides an online conversation with a doctor as an alternative to waiting for a GP appointment. Use of private healthcare has soared in England as the public finds it increasingly hard to get a GP appointment. On Friday, the UK government's health secretary, Steve Barclay, called for more private providers to be used by the NHS to help cut waiting lists. Labour has also pledged to use a private sector in England. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting said the next Labour government will use spare capacity in the private sector to get patients seen faster. Well, of course, the more the English NHS is in crisis and the more that both Tories and Labour use the private healthcare system, the less funding there is then for Scotland and Wales and Ireland, as the devolved nations have our health funding obviously controlled through the Barnett formula, which uses England for some strange reason as the norm. So where England goes, our budgets are forced to follow. I mean, what impact do you think that this will have, and how ominous do you think it is, given the connections that so many of the Tory leadership have with private healthcare? That now the Labour Party is also saying that roll on privatisation and privatisation services.
Well, I think there's a number of things to unpick here, Ruth. I mean, we know that the Tories want to privatise the health service and put it in the hands of their friends, and particularly US healthcare companies. And because of the long waits in the health service, more and more people are, yes, if they can afford it, turning to private healthcare. So the private healthcare service sector is increasing. But if the health boards are told by the Westminster government to use spare capacity in the private sector to reduce waiting lists, then they're going to have to pay for it out of, can't remember what the name is. They're not health boards, they're health something else in England. It's going to have to come out of their budgets. So if they're paying for private healthcare, then there's less in their remaining budget to provide for nurses and doctors in the health service and in the and for investment and up to date equipment and so. So it is really a downward spiral in terms of what is being provided by taxpayers' money to health in England and has consequences for Scotland.
How aware do you think people are, and how much more do you think activists and the Scottish government, the politicians, could or should be doing to make people aware in Scotland of the different ways in which the different ideology that the Scottish Health Board, the Scottish Health Service, is sort of run with more of an
Well, I
eye
think,
to the traditional NHS rather than the privatised model that's creeping out in England or being forced out in England.
well, I'm on the doorsteps speaking to people at least once a week, and the NHS always comes up, and people in Scotland want to see a vibrant national health service free at the point of need in Scotland. And that's, one of the first things that people bring up on the doorsteps. And I think people are aware of what's happening and how the NHS is under threat from what's happening in England. And when it is discussed in Parliament, okay, it's both are in recess at the moment. I think that point is made quite clearly in debates and things. So I do think that most people understand what is happening to the health service under the Tories.
Well, moving on, the Culture, Media and Sport Committee has called on the UK government to tackle tech abuse as they warn devices including smart home security systems are being used to coerce and control victims of domestic abuse. The Westminster Committee launched an inquiry last year to consider the benefits and harms of connected technology, including virtual assistants and fitness trackers. Evidence submitted to the committee suggests most domestic abuse cases in the UK now feature some sort of cyber element where, for instance, a perpetrator can use spyware or other connected devices to monitor the movements of their victims. The report calls on the government to tackle technology facilitated abuse as a priority. As part of the report, the committee also calls for action to protect the privacy and rights of children who are more connected than ever at home and in school. In June, the Westminster government announced it would amend the Online Safety Bill to publish guidance for tech companies to ensure they reduce the abuse that women and girls face online on their platforms, including in the context of domestic violence. Emma Pickering, the Senior Operations Tech Abuse Manager at Refuge, a charity providing specialist support for women and children, said demand for our specialist tech facilitated abuse team has risen exponentially since it was formed in 2017, yet so many remain unaware about what tech facilitated abuse is. Time and again, survivors tell us there's a lack of understanding as to how technology is weaponized against them by their perpetrators when they report this to the police. It's a pretty serious issue, isn't it? I mean, it's you can't step online as a woman without getting trolled and general creepiness happening. Um, for children, the elements of grooming and unwanted approaches are pretty stark. But I mean, this is a whole other side to technology, isn't it? That abusers will track, monitor, and you don't, even if you're going out for a walk to try and get some space, you're still being tracked and monitored and potentially controlled by your abuser.
Yeah, creepy was the word I was going to use as well, Ruth. I find it totally creepy. I think that people who are domestic abusers um, have now got these extra tools to to abuse with, whether it be fitness trackers, home security systems, or baby monitors, even. which they are using more now as tools to monitor or harass or coerce or control is really awful. To think that things that should be useful in the home are now being used to abuse. And I don't know what the makers of these systems can do to stop this, but you can even track what a partner is doing if you have a joint bank account, if you're on online banking, not internet banking. So it is something that I hadn't thought of, but then I don't think about ways in which, you know, people would abuse other people. And I just find it awful that there are these other tools that can be used, not for, physical abuse that we usually think on, but other abuse. And it's just awful that that is increasing so much these days. Um, but
Yes,
it really
it's
has
it.
some sort of laws have to be brought in, I think, to see if we can control it in some way.
Yes, the only hope that one can really take from any of this is that perhaps people with mobile phones are more able to contact secretly organisations like Women's
Mm,
Aid and Refuge to get, and obviously men also who are undergoing
mm,
domestic abuse. There's online ways of getting help more immediately. So moving on to GB News is being investigated for 4 further potential breaches of impartiality rules as the media regulator Ofcom struggles with the right wing's channel willingness to push the boundaries of UK broadcasting news. GP News has repeatedly shown itself willing to challenge the broadcasting code, mocking Ofcom's investigations on air and airing presenters who suggest Ofcom are guilty of hypocrisy and are targeting the channel. There are already 3 Ofcom investigations taking place into GB News' use of the Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg as a presenter during a breaking news story, the channel's campaign against contactless payments, and a potential breach of impartiality rules over allowing 2 Tory MPs to interview the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. The 4 fresh investigations relate to various allegations over a 35-day period earlier this year. The first relates to an episode of Friday Morning with Esther and Phil, which aired on the 12th of May. During the programme, which is hosted by husband and wife Conservative MPs Esther McVey and Philip Davis, the duo discussed the story of a teenager who's being sentenced for terrorism offences. Ofcom rules ban serving politicians from acting as news presenters, interviewers, or reporters on television and radio stations, unless there are exceptional circumstances. However, politicians are allowed to host discussions about current affairs, with the difference between the two often hard to define. The media regulator said it would investigate a programme presented by the former Loaded editor Martin Daubney on the 16th of June, which included a discussion about small boats crossing the Channel and featured an interview with Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK. Ofcom will examine whether the channel met the requirement to include an appropriately wide range of significant views, given it was discussing a topic of significant national political controversy. GB News receives substantial subsidy from its financial backers and is continuing to grow and challenge longer established outlets that carry less opinionated comment. It is also far ahead of Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV, which uh, is pursuing a similar model. I think one of the rules that Ofcom have cited when they were saying that at one point they were saying that one of the complaints which they're now investigating passed their test because the difference was a discussion program being that the presenter did not read directly to camera. Then there was quite a number of people who shared significant number of clips of Jacob Rees-Mogg reading directly to the camera. So it's quite bizarre, isn't it? I mean, Ofcom seems to be sort of donning kid gloves when dealing with GB News. It's. I mean, how important is it? Do you think that GB News is is addressed rigorously by Ofcom?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to broadcast in the UK, then you should be subject to, all broadcasters should be subject to the Ofcom news. But it, seems that the right wing think they've got a right to follow kind of US style Fox News type programs in the UK. I mean, if Ofcom's got any teeth, then it has to curtail the bias that is in GB News. I mean, so many of their presenters, I've never watched it, but I listened to complaints about it. So many of their presenters seem to be um, Tory MPs or Nigel Farage and his ilk. So, um, it, as I say, if there has got to be any control by Ofcom of broadcasting in the UK, then they've got to show their mettle and curtail GB News. And the sooner it's off air, in my view, the better.
But I mean, is this not just indicative of an issue which, for many within the media, so many of the journalists, many who care about journalism and free speech, are watching the grip that this current, the various iterations of the current Conservative Party over the last few years, which seems to be increasingly controlling media and media output. It's. I mean, is this an indication that Ofcom really doesn't have the teeth, and is kind of too scared to even curl a lip at its political masters?
Well, if it's not got the teeth, then it should bring that up surely with elected representatives and MPs and see if anything can be done in that direction, but possibly not under the current government, who are obviously benefiting from outlets like GB News. I suppose, that one thing is that hopefully people who are watching GB News see it for what it is, as a very right wing broadcasting station that is uh, punting the Tory and other right wing lines. But, if you watch it a lot, then you might begin to think that what they're saying is right. So I think it's very dangerous, considering there's absolutely no counterbalance.
Well, moving on to news in America, a leading Democratic senator has called on President Biden to get more personally engaged in stopping racists in the Israeli government from a land grab in the occupied territories and committing gross violations of Palestinian rights, or risk the US's credibility. After a visit to Israel and the West Bank last month, Chris Van Hollen of Maryland said in an interview that the US president should begin by reassessing the US's huge military aid to Israel to prevent it from being used to facilitate annexation of the West Bank and oppression of the Palestinians, including the army's complicity in escalating settler violence against the Arab civilian population. Van Hollen warned that inaction would be seen as weakness by powerful far-right ministers in Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, who have expressed unusual public contempt for Washington. Chris Van Hollen, who is a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, called on the Biden administration to examine whether Israel has fallen afoul of the 1997 Leahy Law, barring assistance to foreign military units that abuse human rights. Chris Van Hollen said he has been unswerving in his support of military aid to Israel to defend itself against Iran, Hezbollah, and other armed groups such as Hamas, but not to be used to oppress the Palestinians. I think it's time to really take a close look at how US security assistance is being used, he said. Well, I mean, obviously, the Israeli government is facing significant unrest amongst its own populations, even amongst some of its military, as they have taken quite extraordinary steps to take control of the country's judiciary, and in face of increased violence, yet again against Palestinians as their homes are taken and basically just handed over to Israeli settlers. What are your views on this potential for America perhaps to start reassessing Israel and the claims that it is an apartheid state?
Well, I think clearly, legislators in the US know about what's happening in Israel and keep a very close watching brief on it because of the huge amounts of military and other aid that is given by the US to Israel. We can't forget that the Jewish lobby in the United States is very powerful, both for the Democrats and the Republicans. And presidential candidates will be thinking about that in the run up to elections in 2024. So it will be interesting to see whether Biden will take a strong line on this or not. But it's clearly a situation which is hugely unsatisfactory for any Democrats in Israel, and we have seen, demonstrations in Israel against what's happening by the Israeli government in Palestine and to the Palestinians, and also what is happening in terms of the politicians interfering in the judiciary. And it is, many have said, becoming an undemocratic state and falling into autocracy. So I think whether Biden or anyone else intervenes will be very interesting to see. And I suppose a lot of it will depend on what their links with the Jewish community in the United States are saying.
Yes, and what the political leanings are is I wonder how long people will take, how much more it will take for people to really look at Netanyahu and see he seems to be a sort of a fairly scurrilous mix of Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, and Bolsonaro. But that's my view. So the Scottish Government is opening exam results helpline for pupils. More than 144,000 pupils across Scotland will be able to access a range of advice in the coming days, including a dedicated helpline to help them assist with their exam results. Skills Development Scotland Results Helpline is staffed by more than 30 expert careers advisors and opens tomorrow, Tuesday the 8th of August, for 4 days. The service provides impartial careers, advice and guidance on the next steps to students and their parents, carers, following the receipt of their exam results. The SDS helpline number is 0800 100 8000 and will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. tomorrow, that's the Tuesday the 8th, and Wednesday the 9th of August. It will then open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Thursday the 10th and Friday the 11th of August. The SQA candidate advice line is 0345 279 and is open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on the 8th of August and 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. on the 9th of August. It offers support and information relating to the Scottish Qualification Certificates. Well, it's going to be a tense day for the Watson household tomorrow because we have one of those big envelopes is arriving for a junior member. So it's what's your experience of the kind
Yeah,
of
it's
stresses and strains that universities and students are under at the moment?
it is hugely stressful for pupils and for parents. But if I talk to my children who have been through this, they'll probably tell you that it was stressing for nothing because, I mean, there's a lot of pressure from parents for kids to go to university and, for teachers, from teachers sometimes too. But, straight into university is often not the best route for a lot of children, young people. There's a great way of going to university now by going to college and doing an HNC and HND and then going into year 2 or 3 at university. So there are lots of different pathways. And, these days, electricians and plumbers earn just as much, if not more, sometimes than the professions that we traditionally think of, doctors and lawyers and things. So if you're earning £45 an hour as a plumber, I was quoted recently, Apprenticeships, I think, are a great way. Apprenticeships, in my book, have parity of esteem with degrees and anything else, and there are so many options available for young people. Please don't stress. It will pass, and you will, find the career that you want, and it may mean that you take a different path, but you'll find that is equally rewarding. Please don't stress, parents or young people.
Well, wise words. I may have to play this back to my daughter tomorrow, depending on how the day goes. Um, Deputy First Minister
Good luck
Shona
to them
Robeson.
all.
Thank you. Yes, yes. Good luck to everyone. Deputy First Minister Shona Robeson attended the Gran Fondo Amateur Time Trial as the 2023 UCI Cycling World Championships continue across Scotland. The Scottish Government are hoping that the world's biggest ever cycling competition will motivate people to cycle for sport, recreation, and active travel. The £8 million Cycling Facilities Fund, delivered in partnership with Sport Scotland, is intended to create a network of new accessible facilities that encourage people of all ages to ride bikes and enjoy cycling. In the time trial, cyclists of varying ages and abilities take on a challenging course that starts in Dundee and takes in parts of Angus before returning to the city. It follows two Grand Fondo road races of different lengths in Perth and Kinross last week. The Deputy First Minister said, I hope that these championships, through its many events such as Grand Fondo, will inspire people from all walks of life to build a more active and healthier Scotland through the power of the bike. I mean, I'm a keen cyclist and I love getting out on my wee electric bicycle because my mangled knees just can't manage a traditional bicycle. But it would be really nice to see more active travel routes. I could cycle into Dundee if the roads weren't insane. And it's as though those routes that I can take, which are nice and quiet, it's great. I can nip in and can fit a box of cat food in my back panniers, and that's all fine. But for a lot of people, it's just not safe to go out with their youngsters, or there aren't safe routes to be cycling to and from work. And I was looking at some video of Paris, which has gone from being an absolutely bonkers a city full of drunk cars to looking really, really Dutch now, with all the cyclists out there. So how likely do you think it is that this will be this first ever a time that all of the events have been held in one nation, um, that this will be a launch pad for Scotland to really get active travel routes sorted out to get safe cycling, safe walking for people?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great coup for Glasgow and Scotland to be the first ever country to host this huge event, apparently bigger than the Commonwealth Games. And I think it's a huge um, window for Scotland to sell itself as a tourist destination. So I think in that way, and the huge amount of people that has brought mainly to the city of Glasgow, but elsewhere, and people spending their money there is a hugely good investment for Glasgow. And for Scotland. And I hope that many of the people who are here for the cycling do come back in future years to see more of Scotland. In terms of cycling and active travel, I mean, the government is pouring more and more money, more and more of the transport budget into active travel. And I think it's very much up to local authorities to decide how they are going to promote active travel using that money in their own areas. And you're right. I think a lot of people would cycle if there were cycle and walking paths that are away from the main traffic routes. So I think there definitely need to be more cycle lanes and wheeling lanes. And I think that's happening in Aberdeen's Main Street, for example. But it really does need to be rolled out more fully and more widely in order to make that for more people to feel comfortable making that shift from the car to bikes, whether they be pedal bikes or wheelers or electric bikes or whatever. I think more and more people are buying electric bikes. So I think the shift is happening, but probably not as fast as most legislators and other people in the active travel field would like.
Well, I was lucky enough to get to Blairgowrie to see the Gran Fondo passing through the town of Blairgowrie, and I was really struck. There was a group of about 12, was about half a dozen, about 12-year-old lads, and one of them would just be hoarse the next day because they just were cheering every cyclist that went past,
Mm,
and there were thousands of cyclists, and
yeah.
it was just so good to see the energy that an event like that brought. These kids were delighted that something so big was happening in their town. So, yes, it's been an
Yeah,
amazing
yeah. I
event.
mean, it's huge when you think of, if you watch the Tour de France and things going through French villages, there's hundreds of people come out and cheer on, and it's great that Scotland has taken it to its heart as well, really.
Yeah, yep,
And
yep.
people have gone. I
It's
think the crowds out yesterday were much bigger than the organisers expected, which is really great.
Aye, well, Scotland does love a party. Well, that's
Yeah.
it for this evening. Thanks, thanks again to my guest, Maureen Watt. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or you can always just squeeze a wee bung. Right now, we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and ensure that we are able to continue making programmes. We are now £250 short of 11,000, but we really need to raise the remaining 19,250 as soon as possible. If you've got a spare £20 on the back of the sofa, please stick it in the coffers. I'm Ruth Watson. Good night, and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.